The ransom note hit the farrier's anvil like a thrown stone, and Noah Fletcher looked up from the draft horse's hoof he was trimming to find a man with a crossbow pointed at his chest. "Read it," the man said. He was broad-shouldered and rough, wearing the faded red sash of Keld's Riders, a mercenary outfit that worked the volcanic valleys south of Asheville. "Read it slow, so you understand." Noah set down his nipping pliers and picked up the folded paper with two steady fingers. He was 32 years old, built lean and hard from years of shoeing cavalry remounts, his hands calloused to the texture of bark, his face browned from a life lived mostly outdoors. He did not panic easily. Panic, he had learned long ago, was a luxury for men who had more to lose than he did. He unfolded the note. It read, "The orc woman known as Yash Fireblood is in our keeping. She will remain alive and unhurt until the 7th day after this note is delivered. The garrison commander at Asheville has until that time to surrender the mineral rights to the Veldra Hot Springs to Keld's Riders. If he refuses, Fireblood dies, and we start on the garrison's horses next. Colonel Davin Keld." Noah read it twice. He set it back on the anvil very carefully. "What does this have to do with me?" he said. The man with the crossbow gestured at the stamp on the garrison wall behind them, the crest of the Asheville cavalry under which Noah had worked as a contracted farrier for the past 3 years. "You work for the garrison. You deliver the message. That is all you do. Try to be a hero and we put a bolt through your knee." "I am a farrier," Noah said, "not a hero." The man lowered the crossbow slightly, seeming satisfied by the answer, and backed away into the steam-hazed alley between the forge and the stable block. Within moments he was gone, swallowed by the perpetual white mist that rolled up from the hot spring terraces below Asheville and kept this whole volcanic valley warm even in the coldest months of the year. Noah picked up the note again. He knew who Yash Fireblood was. Every person in Asheville with eyes knew who she was. She was the orc woman who ran the cavalry's shoeing contracts, who had come to him 3 months ago on behalf of the garrison quartermaster to negotiate terms for the remount herd, and who had stood in this exact forge with her arms crossed and her eyes like hammered copper, and told him his per-shoe rate was fair, but his turnaround time was not. He had agreed to the turnaround without argument, because she had been entirely right, and because he had not been able to think clearly with her standing that close. She was not the sort of woman you forgot. She stood nearly a head taller than he did, green-skinned and broad-shouldered, with the heavy lower canines of her kind pressing against her upper lip in a way that made her look perpetually ready to bite something. Her hair was black and thick, and she kept it bound in a high tail wrapped with strips of red-dyed leather. The outfit she had worn that first day, and every day since when she came to check on the herd, was a set of fitted travel leathers, dark brown, stitched tight across her shoulders and chest and waist, with a laced throat and silver buckles at her hips. She wore short riding boots, knee-high, scuffed at the toe, and she moved in all of it like a woman who had been wearing fighting clothes since she was old enough to stand. She was not a soldier exactly. She had been, once. Noah had gathered from the half-conversations he'd overheard between her and the garrison officers. She had fought in the border wars 10 years ago, on the side of the Alliance Treaty, which was the reason the garrison trusted her with their contracts at all. Now she was a civilian contractor, same as him, but with the bearing of someone who had never quite left the battlefield behind. He had spent 3 months finding excuses to linger near whatever door she might walk through. He had not done anything about it, because he was a farrier from a valley town with no land and no name, and she was Yash Fireblood, and those things seemed very far apart. But the note said she was going to die in 7 days if the garrison commander chose his pride over her life. Noah had met the garrison commander once. His name was Colonel Verkstrand, and he had the eyes of a man who calculated costs before he felt them. The mineral rights to the Veldra Hot Springs were worth more than any contract the garrison held. Noah did not think Colonel Strand was going to hand them over, which meant that unless something changed, Yash Fireblood was going to die. Noah folded the note, tucked it into his boot, finished the last trim on the draft horses near 4 with the speed of long practice, and went to find the quartermaster. He gave the note to the quartermaster, who took it upstairs to the colonel, and Noah stood in the courtyard and watched the steam rise off the lower terraces and thought about what a man did when the world arranged itself this way. The colonel's answer came back down in less than an hour, delivered by the quartermaster with a grim face and short words. The garrison would not be surrendering the mineral rights. Keld's riders were a mercenary outfit, not a recognized military power, and the colonel did not negotiate with mercenaries. The note would be filed as a threat, and the garrison would increase its patrols. "What about Fireblood?" Noah asked. The quartermaster looked at him with something between pity and discomfort. "The colonel considers the situation deeply unfortunate. He will note in his report that she served the garrison with distinction." Noah stood very still for a moment. "He is going to let her die," he said. "The colonel does not negotiate with—" "I heard you," Noah said. He went back to the forge and picked up his nipping pliers and put them down again because his hands were not steady enough to use them safely. He stood at the window that looked out over the terraced town of Asheville below, the white stone buildings stacked on the hillside above the hot spring pools, the steam rising in great lazy plumes from the blue-green water, the market road winding down through the valley where the volcanic soil grew everything thicker and darker than it did anywhere else. It was a beautiful place. He had grown up 40 miles east of it, and he had come here for the garrison contract because the pay was better than the village smithy had been, and he had stayed because the work was good, and the valley was warm even in winter, and because after a while you stopped noticing that you were alone. He had noticed 3 months ago when Yash Fireblood had walked into his forge. He went to find Marta, who kept the guest house 2 streets below the garrison gate and who knew everything about everyone in Asheville and could be trusted with information worth keeping quiet. "Keld's riders," Marta said, not looking up from the bread she was kneading. She was 60 years old, gray-braided, with a scar along her jaw from a border war she declined to discuss. "They have a camp up at Veldra on the north rim above the main pool. 24 men, maybe 30. Davin Keld used to be a cavalry officer, dishonorable discharge. Now he runs contracts for whoever pays and takes whatever else he can get." "How did they take her?" "She was up at Veldra yesterday for the spring survey inspection. She goes every month on behalf of the garrison, checks the mineral draw is within the treaty limits." Marta pressed her fists into the dough with steady force. "Smart place to take her. Remote, defensible, and it doubles as a statement. Take the survey woman at the thing you want to own." "How do I get up there?" Marta looked up then. "You are a farrier," she said. "I have been told," he said. She studied him for a long moment, with the particular attention of a woman who had survived things by judging people accurately. Whatever she found in his face seemed to satisfy her, or at least to convince her that stopping him would require more energy than she had today. "There is an old service trail up the north wall of the valley," she said. "The spring workers used it before the main road was cut. It comes out above the camp behind the steam vents. If Keld's men are watching the road, they will not be watching the vents." She paused. "You will need to know the camp layout. Can you draw it?" She wiped her hands on her apron and reached for a piece of chalk. Noah rode out of Asheville in the early dark of the following morning, before the garrison's dawn watch changed, and anyone official might ask where he was going. He took his own horse, a short-backed bay mare named Brick who had been shoeing trained and would stand still for anything up to and including fire, and he took his farrier's tool roll because it was the one bag of gear he was never without, and because it contained a hoof knife with a blade 4 inches long and good steel, and he took 2 days of hardtack and a water skin, and a coil of rope that he used for difficult horses but which had other applications. He did not take a sword because he did not own one. He did not take a crossbow because the same was true. He had a belt knife, the hoof knife, and the stubborn conviction that these things were problems to be solved once he found them rather than before. The trail Marta had described was exactly where she said it would be. It was narrow and steep, switchbacking up through the dark scrub that grew in the iron-rich volcanic soil of the valley wall, and the steam from the upper vents made the air thick and warm even at this elevation, which meant there was no frost on the rocks and Brick's footing was good. They climbed for an hour and a half as the sky went from black to the gray-purple of early dawn. He heard the camp before he saw it. Men talking, the scrape of iron on stone, someone coughing over a fire. Noah dismounted, tied Brick to a gray-rooted scrub tree well back from the vent line, and went forward on foot. The camp was laid out almost exactly as Marta had drawn it. A main fire at the center of a natural hollow in the rimrock, 4 large hide tents ringing it, watch posts at the 2 trail approaches but not at the vent field behind. There were indeed about 24 men, most of them still wrapped in their bedrolls at this hour, 2 on watch, 1 feeding the fire. Noah found Yash Fireblood in the 3rd tent from the left. He knew it was hers because she had kicked the tent peg out on one side and the sidewall was lifted an inch from the ground, and he could see the sole of one boot pressing against the fabric, with the steady, methodical rhythm of someone testing her restraints. He moved around the outside of the hollow, keeping to the steam shadow where the heat shimmer would blur his outline, and came up beside the 3rd tent on its blind side. He put his mouth close to the tent fabric and said, very quietly, "Fireblood." The boot stopped moving. "There are 2 of us," he said, which was a lie, but it seemed like the sort of lie that would make the next 30 seconds go better. The boot shifted. A low voice came back, barely above a murmur, textured and rough and absolutely steady. "Who is the second one?" "Nobody," he admitted. "I lied, I am Noah Fletcher, the farrier." A pause of about 3 seconds. "Fletcher," the voice said, and there was something in it he could not entirely read, not disbelief exactly, more like someone recalibrating very quickly. "Are you armed?" "Not in any way that would impress you. Can you cut the side stake and pull me out before the watch comes around?" "Yes." "Then stop talking and do it." He had the side stake out with the hoof knife in under a minute, and he held the tent wall up, and she rolled through the gap in a single smooth motion that demonstrated exactly how much of her stillness before had been restraint rather than helplessness. She came up out of the ground and stood at full height in the steam-filtered early light, and Noah had one crystalline, thoroughly inconvenient moment of noticing that she was the most striking person he had ever seen, and that the cord they had used to tie her wrists had left marks on her skin that made him angrier than he had a right to be given that he had known her for 3 months, and said nothing to her except professionally correct things about horseshoe gauges. Her hands were still bound in front of her. He cut the cord. She shook her hands out, turned her head to look at the camp, and said quietly, "One more thing. They took my blades, tent 1 left of the fire." "That is the one with 2 men in it," Noah said. "I know." She looked at him. Her eyes in this light were the color of dark amber, warm and sharp at once, and she was looking at him as though she was not sure yet whether to be grateful or concerned. "You said you are not armed in any impressive way." "I said nothing about being sensible." Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but the suggestion that one was possible. "Give me your belt knife," she said. "I will get my own blades. You stay here." He gave her the knife. He did not stay there. He followed her, keeping low, watching the watch posts while she moved around the fire's edge with a silence that was genuinely impressive from a woman her size, because she was large and she was wearing buckled leather, and she made approximately no sound. She was in tent 1 for 90 seconds. She came out with 2 short, broad-bladed fighting knives on her belt, and his belt knife offered back to him hilt first, and there was a second man in tent 1 who was now sleeping somewhat more deeply than he had been, tied and gagged with his own belt. "Go," she said. They went. They moved through the steam vents at a fast crouch, down the service trail at a controlled run, reached Brick just as the first shout went up from the camp above. Yash looked at the horse, looked at Noah, and said, "She can carry 2. "She can carry 2, he confirmed, because Brick was a draft-bred mare and had the back for it. He was in the saddle and she swung up behind him with the ease of someone who had mounted moving horses under worse conditions than these, and her arms went around his waist, and Brick went down the trail at a rate that was technically still walking, but was the fastest walk a horse had ever executed in this valley. They were back on the main road to Asheville before the sounds from the camp had organized themselves into anything resembling pursuit. Yash's arms were still around his waist. He was extremely aware of this. "Fletcher," she said behind his ear. "Yes. The garrison sent you." It was not quite a question. He heard what was underneath it anyway, the careful neutrality of someone who had survived long enough to know that rescue had conditions attached. "No," he said. "The garrison filed your situation as deeply unfortunate and declined to negotiate." A silence. "So you came alone," she said, "with a rope and a hoof knife and a mare named Brick." Another silence, different in texture from the first. "Why?" she said. He thought about giving her the honest answer. He thought about it for approximately 30 seconds while Brick took them around a switchback and the valley opened up below them, golden in the early light, the hot spring pools smoking blue and green on the terraces, Asheville's white stone walls warm against the volcanic hillside. "Because the colonel was going to let you die and that seemed wrong," he said, which was true as far as it went. She did not say anything else for the rest of the descent. They came into Asheville through the lower market gate rather than the garrison gate, which Noah thought was probably wise given that the garrison had officially done nothing, and it would be better if it stayed officially that way. He left Brick at the public stable, which was a place he also worked 2 mornings a week as supplemental income, and he walked Yash through the market road as it began to fill with the early morning traders. People looked at them. People always looked at Yash, because she was the tallest person in most rooms, and because she was an orc woman in a human town, and the looking had the particular quality of people who were not actively hostile but who had absorbed enough old war attitudes that they did not quite know what to do with their faces. Noah had noticed this before. In the 3 months he had been watching her. She carried it the way she carried everything, with her chin up and her pace steady and her expression giving nothing away. This morning, walking through the market with rope burn on her wrists and dried mud on her knees and her fighting knives on her belt, she drew more looks than usual. Noah fell in step beside her, close enough to be clearly with her and matched her pace. She glanced at him once. He kept looking forward. "You do not need to do that," she said. "I know." She looked at him a moment longer and then looked forward too, and they walked together up through the market road and into the upper town. He took her to Marta's guest house because Marta was discreet and had a good fire and was, he thought, probably already awake and possibly already expecting them. He was right on all 3 counts. Marta had hot water on and bread from this morning's first baking, and she took one look at Yash's wrists and disappeared to find a salve without being asked. Yash sat down at Marta's kitchen table like someone who was only allowing herself to sit because the immediate urgency was over. She held her hands flat on the table and looked at the rope marks. "Tell me about the colonel's decision," she said. Noah told her, flat and simple, no softening. She listened without expression. "He will file a report noting I served with distinction," she said when he finished. Those were approximately the quartermaster's words, yes. She looked at her hands for a moment more. Then she looked up at him, and the amber of her eyes was direct and unguarded in a way he had not seen from her before, and it caught in his chest like a spark on dry tinder. "You could have lost your contract," she said. "If Keld's men had taken you, the garrison would have done the same for you." "I know," he said. "Why is it not a deterrent?" This was the second time she had asked a version of this question, and the honest answer was still the honest answer, and now that they were sitting at a kitchen table in good light with no immediate pursuit, it felt both more possible and more frightening to say. "Because," he said, and then stopped and tried again. "Because I have been finding reasons to be wherever you were going to be for 3 months and doing nothing about it, and I thought if I let the colonel file a report and did nothing, I would never be able to look at myself in a mirror again." The kitchen was very quiet. Marta came back with the salve at this precise moment, with the timing of a woman who had perfected the art of not arriving too early. Yash did not look away from Noah. He did not look away from her. Marta set the salve on the table between them and said, entirely to the room, "I will go check on my other guests," and left again. Yash looked down at the salve. She looked at her wrists. She looked up at Noah. "You should apply it," she said. "Your hands are steadier than mine right now." His hands were not particularly steady at this moment, but he took the salve and pulled his chair around to her side of the table and began working it into the marks on her wrists with careful fingers. Her skin was warm, a different warmth than he expected, warmer than his own, and the green of it in the morning light was the color of deep water, and he thought about this more than was helpful. She was watching him do it. "I have outlived every man who loved me," she said quietly. He kept working the salve in. "I am 34 years old," she said. "I have been in 3 wars. I have walked away from all of them, and the men who walked beside me have not always been so lucky. There was a soldier named Durin in the First War, who was 22 and sweet, and thought that being brave was enough to make him invulnerable. There was a ranger named Seville in the border campaigns, who was wise and careful and died in a rockslide that had nothing to do with warfare, and that he could not have predicted or prevented. There was a merchant named Torak who was careful and kind and who was killed in a road robbery 3 years ago, 2 miles outside this valley." She paused. "I carry them all. I have decided not to carry any more." Noah finished with her left wrist and moved to her right. He thought about what to say. He could feel her watching him think. "That sounds like something you decided after the last one," he said. "It is. How long ago was that?" 2 years. He worked the salve into the mark above her right wrist where the cord had been tightest. "I plan to be stubborn," he said, a long quiet. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means I heard what you said and I understand it, and it does not change anything about what I said before. And I know that is not the answer you were looking for, but it is the only one I have." He set the salve down. He did not let go of her hand immediately. "I am not Durin, and I am not Seville, and I am not Torak. I am a farrier who came up a volcanic service trail in the dark with a rope and a hoof knife, and I have no particular death wish, and I intend to be here a long time." She looked at their hands on the table, his rough and scarred from hot metal and horse hooves, hers large and green and marked from cords and scarred from older things. "You are stubborn," she said. "I have been told." "By whom?" "Every horse I have ever shod." She made a sound then, low and abrupt, that was almost a laugh. It changed everything about her face. He thought with a clarity that surprised him that he was completely finished for. Keld's riders did not take the failed extraction quietly. The next morning there was a message delivered to the garrison gate, addressed to the farrier Noah Fletcher by name, which told him that Colonel Keld considered the rescue of his hostage a breach of good faith and would be taking additional measures. The garrison quartermaster came to the forge at noon, visibly uncomfortable, and told Noah that the colonel, their colonel, Colonel Strand, felt it would be better for everyone if Noah kept a lower profile for a few weeks. "He wants me to leave," Noah said. "He wants the situation to quiet down. Keld named me by name. Leaving Asheville does not quiet that down." The quartermaster looked miserable. He was a decent man, Noah thought, trapped between a rigid commander and a situation that had no clean angles. "He is aware of what Fireblood means to the contracts," the quartermaster said, very carefully. "He is aware that her loss would have been a significant disruption. He does not wish to lose the arrangement. He simply would like you to understand that the garrison's official position is that it had no involvement in the extraction." "I understand that," Noah said. "I never said it did. He would like it to remain so." "Fine." Noah picked up his nipping pliers. "Tell him I am still here and I will keep doing my job, and if Keld's men come looking for me in the garrison yard, that becomes the colonel's problem whether he likes it or not." The quartermaster took this back upstairs. Yash came to the forge that afternoon. She had a report to file on the Veldra survey inspection she had been taken from, which she was finishing from memory, and she used Noah's work table as a writing surface because hers was, she said, currently covered in maps. She wrote quickly and economically, the pen moving in short, sure strokes, and Noah worked around her, trimming and setting shoes on 3 cavalry horses, and they did not speak much, but the silence between them was different from the careful professional silence of the previous 3 months. It had more breathing room in it. It was a silence that knew what it was. When she finished writing, she set the pen down and stretched her arms over her head, and Noah noticed this despite his best efforts not to. "Keld will make another move," she said, rolling her neck. "He cannot afford to let the hostage situation look like a failure. His reputation depends on outcomes." "What kind of move?" "He will want to demonstrate control over something valuable. The hot springs are the obvious target. He may try to physically occupy the upper terrace and force the garrison to respond." She dropped her arms. "Or he will come here. Here meaning Asheville. Here meaning you and me. We are the visible outcome of his failure. Removing us changes the story." She looked at him directly. "You should know that." "I do know that." He set down the hoof he was holding and straightened up. "What do you want to do about it?" She looked at him with that assessing quality she had, the one that saw more than she said. "You are asking me what I want. You were a soldier. You know tactical problems better than I do. You know Keld. I am asking." Something in her face changed subtly, in the way that something subtly changing in an orc woman's face could still be the most expressive thing in the room. "Most people either tell me to leave it to the garrison or try to make the decisions for me," she said. "The garrison's recent record on decisions is not encouraging," Noah said, "and you are more than capable of making your own." She was quiet for a moment. "We need better information on Keld's numbers and weapons," she said. "Marta knows people at the upper terrace market. If Keld is preparing a move, his men will be buying supplies." "I will talk to Marta tonight." "So will I." She stood, tucking the report into her leather document roll. "Fletcher." "Yes." "The thing you said this morning about being stubborn." "Yes." "I have not decided anything," she said. "I know. I am telling you so you understand the position accurately." "I do." She studied him for another moment with those amber eyes that he was starting to think about at times entirely unrelated to their proximity. "You do not seem discouraged," she said. "I said I was stubborn," he said. "I did not say I was uncertain." She left without responding to that, and he listened to her boots on the stone floor all the way out, and then stood in the forge alone, and smiled at the wall for a moment before getting back to work. Marta's information, gathered that evening over the guesthouse's long table while Yash sat at one end and Noah sat at the other, and Marta stood at the kitchen doorway and told them things, was worse than they had hoped and better than they had feared. Keld had increased his camp to close to 40 men, and had sent to the lowlands for 2 wagons of crossbow bolts, which suggested a sustained occupation rather than a raid. But 3 of his senior riders had left the camp 2 days ago and not returned, which suggested either desertion or a splinter in his command structure. His second, a woman named Brex, was seen in the lower market yesterday, Marta said, buying passage south on a river boat, alone. Brex was Keld's restraint, Yash said. She was the one who kept his operations from becoming massacres. If she is leaving, he is more dangerous now, not less. "He will want a visible win quickly," Noah said, "before the rest of his command loses faith." "Yes," Yash spread her hands on the table, "which means the move comes soon, within the week." "Do we tell the garrison?" Yash's jaw tightened. It was a brief expression, quickly controlled, but he saw it. "The garrison will file it," she said, "and then congratulate themselves on their record-keeping." "Then we do not do this through the garrison," Noah said. Marta looked between them with her measuring gaze. "There are people in this town who have their own reasons to keep Keld out of the valley," she said. "Merchants, spring workers, the 2 families who lease the mineral terraces. They have money and some of them have arms. If Keld is planning an occupation, they have a stronger stake in stopping it than the garrison does." "Organize them," Yash said. "Someone needs to stand in front of them," Marta said. "Someone they will listen to." Yash and Noah looked at each other across the table. "You," Noah said to Yash, You have the military background and you know the terrain. They will listen to me as a voice, Yash said, but a room of Asheville merchants and spring workers will listen more reliably to a human voice if there is one standing beside me. Then both of us, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Both of us, she agreed. The meeting happened the next evening in the main room of Marta's guest house, which was the largest private room in the lower town, and which Marta had arranged with a speed and efficiency that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this kind of occasion for some time. 14 people came, 3 of the larger merchants, both terrace lease families, the head of the Spring Workers Guild, 2 retired soldiers who now ran a timber operation in the valley, and 4 townspeople who came because word traveled fast in a small town, and they wanted to know what was happening. Yash stood at the front of the room and laid out the situation without dramatics or excess language. Keld's riders, 40 armed mercenaries, occupied the upper vent rim with military organization. Their commander was a disgraced cavalry officer with no remaining internal moderation. He intended either an occupation of the hot spring terraces or a punitive strike on the town, possibly both, within the week. The garrison had declined to engage. The town needed to decide what it wanted to do. There was the predictable noise, the predictable arguments. Someone said that perhaps Keld could be negotiated with, that mercenaries wanted money and money could be found. Someone else said that showing weakness would bring more mercenaries next season. A third voice said that the orc woman might have information that was not entirely objective, since she was personally involved. Noah, who had been standing to Yash's left, said, "Fireblood's analysis is correct. I went up to that camp myself 2 days ago and I have seen the setup. It is not a negotiating position. It is a staging ground." He said it quietly, with the flatness of someone who was not trying to convince them so much as report a fact. "The man who sent a crossbowman to my forge to deliver a ransom note is not going to take a merchant's purse and ride away satisfied. He is going to take the purse and stay anyway." The room was not perfectly quiet, but it was quieter. "What is the proposal?" said the head of the Spring Workers Guild, who was a practical woman named Asta, and who had the look of someone who had already decided to act and was waiting for a plan to attach herself to. Yash laid out a plan. She proposed that the town coordinate a visible defense of the main terrace access road, which was the only route wide enough to bring wagons into the valley, and that the retired soldiers organize the able-bodied townspeople into rotating watch positions. Not a militia, exactly, but a presence that would make an occupation expensive rather than easy. She proposed that Marta use her contacts to get a message to the river authority 2 days south, who had their own interest in keeping the valley trade routes clear, and who had more political weight than the local garrison commander. And she proposed that Noah, who had freedom of movement as a civilian contractor with legitimate business on the upper terrace roads, act as a scout to track Keld's timing. The room argued for 40 minutes and then agreed. On the way out of Marta's, walking up the narrow street toward the upper town in the warm, volcanic evening air with the spring steam drifting around the lamp posts, Yash said, "You did not have to speak in there." "You were doing fine," he said, but fine was not quite fast enough. She was quiet for a moment, their footsteps on stone. "It still surprises me," she said. "What does?" "That you are not embarrassed," she said, "standing up for me in a room in public, knowing what the room thinks about orc women and human men." "What the room thinks about that is the room's problem," he said. She stopped walking. He stopped a step ahead of her and turned. The lamp on the wall above them put orange light on her face, and she was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, open in a way that he thought cost her something to show, and he stayed very still because he had the feeling that moving wrong in this moment would be like spooking a horse that was deciding whether to trust you. "I told you I have not decided anything," she said. "You did." "I am reconsidering the timeline of that process," she said. He waited. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them in a single stride, because she had long legs and the reach for it, and she put one hand against his jaw and tilted his head up slightly because she was taller and kissed him. It was not tentative. She did not do tentative, he thought, somewhat incoherently. It was direct and warm and tasted of the clove-spiced tea Marta had been serving, and her hand was warm on his jaw, and her mouth was sure against his, and he put his hands at her waist, at the smooth leather of her fitted jacket, and kissed her back with every bit of the intention that had been building in him for 3 months and doing nothing. She pulled back after a moment. She was looking at him very close, her thumb still at his jaw. "Still planning to be stubborn," she said. "Absolutely," he said. The breath she let out was something between a laugh and a sigh. "I told you I have outlived them," she said, and her voice was lower now, the way it went when she was not performing steadiness but genuinely trying to say something true. "I told you because it is real, and I needed you to know it is real. I am not a woman who loses people easily or mourns them quickly. Durin and Seville and Torek are still with me. They will always be with me. I do not know what you do with that." "I do not need you to forget them," Noah said. "I need you to let me be the next one. The one that stays." She looked at him for a long moment. "The one that is stubborn," she said. "The one that is stubborn," he agreed. She lowered her hand from his jaw, but she took his hand when she did it, her large fingers closing around his calloused ones, and they walked up the rest of the street like that, in the warm, steam-scented night, and Noah thought he could feel his whole chest rearranging itself around something new. Keld made his move 4 days later, and he did not aim it at the terrace access road. He brought 12 men into the lower town market at noon on a market day, which was the worst possible time for everyone except Keld, who had clearly chosen it deliberately. Market day meant crowds, which meant witnesses, which meant the town watch was outnumbered and reluctant to start anything that might go badly in front of the spring terraces paying visitors. Keld himself rode in at the front, which Noah had not expected, a large man in his late 40s with a close-cut gray beard and the posture of someone who had once commanded soldiers and still expected the world to arrange itself around him accordingly. Keld rode to the center of the market square and stopped, and his men fanned out around the perimeter, crossbows visible but not raised, and Keld stood in his stirrups and said, in a carrying voice, "I am looking for the orc contractor Yash Fireblood. I have a grievance to settle with her, and I have come to settle it in the open, where the town can see it done fairly." The market had gone very quiet. "Fairly," said Yash from behind Noah. She had been at the stable block, he learned later, working on the remount allocation, and she had heard the news within 2 minutes because market day sound traveled in this town like it traveled in a valley, bouncing off stone and water, and she had come straight to the market square with her fighting knives at her belt and her report roll still tucked under her arm, which for some reason was the detail he kept returning to later. The report roll. She had not even put it down. She handed him the roll and stepped past him into the square. The crowd, which had been frozen in the particular stillness of people who were witnesses to something they had not signed up for, opened a channel for her without being asked. She walked through it to the square's center and stood there, 10 feet from Keld's horse, and looked up at him with her arms at her sides. "You want the garrison's cooperation on the springs," she said, loud enough for the square to hear. The garrison said no. "So you took me to force the issue, and a farrier with a rope got me out, and now you are here to restore your reputation. Is that about right?" Keld's face was controlled, but not entirely. "You made me look weak," he said, "in front of my men." "You made yourself look weak," she said. "I only left." Someone in the crowd made a sound, not quite a laugh, more like the sound of air that had been held and then partially released. Keld swung down from his horse. He was taller than Noah had estimated and broad, with the movement of a man who had trained for combat for a long time and still kept in the habit. He wore a cavalry saber and a belt knife, and he moved like he expected both to be useful in the next few minutes. "You are going to come back to my camp," he said, "and we are going to have another conversation about how the garrison is going to respond to my proposal." "No," Yash said. "I have 12 men in this square. I see them." Her voice was entirely flat, not hostile, not frightened, just factual. "I also see the people in this square who have been living here for 20 years and who have built their houses and their businesses in this valley, and who are tired of cavalry officers, retired or otherwise, deciding that their town is a place things can be taken from." She turned her head slowly, taking in the crowd without moving from her position, and her voice rose just enough to carry to the edges. "These mineral rights are the town's rights. Keld wants them for a mercenary operation that would charge every spring worker, every merchant, every visitor twice what they pay now and pocket the difference. That is what you are watching in this square today." The crowd was not quiet anymore. It had the particular sound of a crowd that was revising its understanding of a situation in real time and did not like what it was finding. Keld's jaw was tight. "This is not the time for speeches." "You rode into a market square with 12 crossbowmen on a market day," she said. "You made it the time for speeches." She settled her weight, both feet planted. "You want to settle a grievance. Settle it. You and me in this square right now with these people watching. Leave your men and your crossbows out of it." The crowd noise shifted. There was interest in it now, the specific interest of people who were watching something unexpected and dangerous and could not look away. Keld looked at her with the assessing gaze of a fighter calculating odds. He was taller and heavier and had professional combat training, and he was clearly running this calculation and liking the result. "Agreed," he said. What happened in the next 90 seconds was something that Noah would think about for the rest of his life, with a mixture of awe and something warm and fierce that he did not have a name for. Keld drew his saber. Yash drew one fighting knife. Keld attacked first, a controlled, technically sound opening cut, the kind of thing a trained saber man did when he was confident and wanted to end it quickly. Yash moved sideways and let it pass close enough that the crowd pulled back a half step in a single ripple. And then she did something with her left hand that Noah could not entirely follow from his angle, but which involved the report roll he had still been holding, and which she had apparently taken back from him at some point without his noticing, and she brought it down across Keld's sword wrist with a crack that made the crowd wince. He did not drop the saber. She had not expected him to. It was not the point. The point was that when his arm reflexed, he stepped left, and she was already moving right, and she got behind his reach and used her height and her weight and the 3 seconds of advantage that the wrist blow had given her, and she put him on the ground. Not dead. Not badly hurt. Just down, face first in the market square stone, with her knee on his back and her knife at his neck and his saber 3 feet away from his hand. The crowd was completely silent. Then Asta, the Springworkers Guild head, started clapping. It was not the tentative clap of someone who was not sure if this was appropriate. It was the solid, deliberate "this is what I think" clap of a woman who had been waiting for something to become clear and had just seen it happen. The rest of the square joined in the ragged but genuine way of people who had made a collective decision. Keld's 12 men looked at each other. The crossbows stayed where they were, not raised. One of them, the one nearest the square entrance, slowly turned his horse. 2 others followed. Yash took her knee off Keld's back and stood up. She picked up the saber and held it out hilt first to a man she apparently recognized at the edge of the crowd, who took it with the look of someone being given evidence. "Get out of my town," she said to Keld's back. He got up slowly with the stiffness of a man who was going to feel that for a week. He looked at his remaining men. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Yash. He left. Noah walked out to her through the crowd, which made way for him, and he stood in front of her in the market square with the bright volcanic sunlight on the pale stone around them, and she was breathing a little harder than her stillness suggested, and there was a small cut on her upper arm where Keld's saber had been closer than he had realized, and he wanted very badly to touch her face, but the entire market square was watching them. She held out the report roll. "I borrowed this," she said. He took it. He looked at her. "Are you hurt?" "Surface cut. I have had worse from bad parchment." He laughed, which surprised both of them. She looked at him with that not quite a smile again, the one that was warmer than a smile because it was unexpected from her face, and he thought he was going to carry this moment, the two of them standing in the sun in the square with the crowd around them and her hand extending the battered report roll for a very long time. Keld and his remaining men rode out of the valley that afternoon. The town watch reported them gone before evening. 3 days later, the message Marta had sent to the river authority came back with a response. An investigator was being dispatched to document the hostage situation and the unauthorized armed occupation of the Spring Terrace approach, and criminal proceedings would be recommended against Davin Keld and the riders. It was not a clean, instant justice, but it was the kind that tended to stick. The garrison, which had done none of this, put a notice on the public board thanking the community for its vigilance. Yash read the notice, read it again, and said, to no one in particular but in Noah's hearing, "I need a drink." They went to the lower tavern, which was called the Center House, and which served the best hot-spiced wine in the valley on account of the volcanic spring water it used in its brewing process. They sat at a table by the fire, because even in this warm valley there was something instinctively right about a fire when the day had been what this day had been, and Yash drank her wine in slow, deliberate sips, and Noah watched her face come down from the high alertness of the last week into something that was, if not rest, at least a pause. "You have your contracts," he said, "and the town keeps its springs. And Keld is going to spend a year explaining himself to a river authority investigator." She turned her cup in her hands. "Not a bad outcome. You put a disgraced cavalry colonel face down in the market square in front of the whole town," Noah said. "I would call that better than not a bad outcome." "It was expedient," she said. "It was the most impressive thing I have ever seen." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You are easily impressed." "I shoe horses for a living," he said. "But no." She set the cup down. She leaned her elbows on the table, which brought her face closer to his, and the fire was warm and the room was busy, and the space between them had the particular quality of a space that had decided to become smaller. "You are still being stubborn," she said. "Still," he agreed. "You have not changed your mind in the last week." "I have not changed my mind in 3 months. The last week just gave me more to confirm it." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him, and the amber of her eyes in the firelight was deep and warm and searching. "You want to know what I am afraid of," she said. "If you want to tell me." "I am afraid," she said, with the directness of someone who had decided that if she was going to say a thing, she was going to say it without qualification, "that you will become someone I cannot imagine being without. And then the world will take you away from me the way it has taken every person I have allowed to become that. I am not afraid of losing you the way a timid person is afraid. I'm afraid the way a soldier is afraid of a weapon they have reason to respect." He looked at her for a moment. "I understand that," he said. "Do you?" "My parents were both dead before I was 20, he said. "Nothing dramatic, a fever and a bad winter, same as happens everywhere. And I did what people do. I got small. I stopped expecting things to stay. I took the garrison contract because it was short-term, renewable, no commitment. I have been renewing it for 3 years. He turned his cup in his hands, mirroring her gesture without meaning to. "I am not careless with your fear. I am saying that the alternative to it is the place I have been, and I would rather be afraid with you than comfortable without you." She was very still. The fire crackled. Someone across the tavern laughed at something. "Noah," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. She had always said Fletcher the way she said everything, clean and direct and professionally grounded. His name in her voice was something entirely different, and he felt it move through him like heat. "Yes," he said. "I have decided," she said. He waited. "I have decided," she said, "that you are going to be the one that stays. And that if the world has an objection to that, the world can settle it with me in a market square." He laughed again, differently this time, in the way of something releasing rather than something surprised. She reached across the table and took his hand, and he turned it over and held hers, and they sat like that in the Center House by the fire and talked until the bar staff started putting out the lanterns. They walked back up through Asheville in the late night. through streets quiet now, the steam from the springs rising in the dark like slow breathing, the volcanic valley holding its warmth around them. They walked close enough that their arms brushed, and then close enough that they didn't, because Yash took his arm in the way of someone who had decided something and intended it to be visible. They stopped at the turn where the road to the garrison went one way and the road to the guest house went the other. She turned to face him. She put her hands at his waist, the same way he had put his at hers 3 days ago in the lamplight, and she looked at him with the particular look that he was starting to recognize as her honest face, the one that did not perform composure or caution, the one she reserved for moments she had decided to actually inhabit. "I'm not gentle with the things I choose," she said. "My people are not gentle with those things. If I tell you that you are mine, I mean it the way my kind means it." "How does your kind mean it?" he said. "We do not loan ourselves," she said. "We do not hold back. When an orc woman chooses a man, she chooses him completely, his good days and his bad ones, his certainties and his failures, the whole of him, and she will stand with him against anything. It is not a casual thing. It is the largest thing we know how to do." She paused, and she expects the same in return. "I can give you that," he said. "You are a stubborn man who climbed a volcanic mountain in the dark for a woman he had not spoken to about any of this," she said, and there was warmth in it, deep and real. "I am," he said. She leaned down and kissed him again, and this one was different from the first, slower and deeper, with the weight of everything that had been said between them. And he put his arms around her properly, and she put hers around him, and it was warm and it was very honest, and it lasted long enough that when they finally separated, the steam around the nearest spring vent had drifted across the road and wrapped around them like something conspiratorial. "Come with me," she said, against his ear. He went. Her quarters were in the east wing of the garrison guest block, 2 rooms that she had made into something that looked like her, spare and functional, with maps on one wall and her equipment on careful hooks, and a narrow window that looked out over the upper terraces and the dark pools below. There was a fire in the grate and a lamp on the table, and she closed the door and turned to look at him with no performance left in her at all, just the reality of her, warm and present and wanting him in a way that was entirely plain. He crossed the room to her, which was not far because the room was not large, and because she had not moved back from the door. "You are going to have to accept," she said, "that I am very much larger than you." "I noticed," he said. "I have been noticing for 3 months. That does not present a difficulty." "It presents a circumstance I have been thinking about frequently," he said, which made her make that low, abrupt sound that was her version of a laugh. And then she pulled him in, and the lamp on the table burned low, and the window showed the dark valley below with its breathing springs, and the stars over the volcanic ridge were very bright, and the night was warm and long. In the morning he woke to the sound of her moving around the room with the efficiency of someone whose personal discipline included getting up before dawn, and he lay in the narrow bed that had proven adequate and watched her buckle her travel leathers in the gray light and thought that he had never in his life seen a more compelling sight. She looked over and saw him watching. "You are awake," she said. "I am." "You are smiling at nothing." "I am smiling at something," he said. She came back to the bed and sat on the edge of it and kissed him once, direct and certain, and then stood up again. "There is a survey report that needs to be delivered to the garrison records office before the morning watch," she said. "And you have horses." "I have horses," he confirmed. "Good." She tucked the last buckle at her hip and reached for her report roll. "Fletcher." "Fletcher again," he noted. "Noah," she said, and the warmth in it was different now, personal and sure. "Come find me at midday." "I will," he said. The week that followed was the kind of week that had no precedent in Noah's life, because it was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, which turned out to be the most disorienting combination possible. He worked his horses every morning, and she worked her surveys and reports, and they met at midday or at the center house in the evenings, and they talked and argued and laughed. And he learned things about her that he had been constructing from observations for 3 months, and found that his constructions had been approximately correct in outline and entirely wrong in warmth. She had grown up in the eastern ranges, in an orc clan that had followed the old migration routes until the border wars had made the routes impossible to follow. She had fought in the wars because she was good at it, and because there was nothing else left to do with the skills the world had given her, and she had come out of them with the contracts and the reputation and the strange in-between position of an orc woman who was trusted by humans enough to do their surveys, but never quite trusted enough for the trust to be comfortable. She read maps for pleasure. She had very strong opinions about the quality of orc work versus human work in the maintenance of volcanic spring channels. She disliked horses in the specific way of someone who respected them but did not find their company relaxing. "They are too unpredictable," she said. "You are describing yourself," he said. "I am describing horses," she said, but she was smiling, the real smile that was still rare enough that getting it felt like a specific achievement. He learned that she did not sleep well without noise, that she had kept a small clay figure of a running horse that Durin had made her in the First War, and that she still had it and kept it on her windowsill, that she was a better cook than anyone who ate the way she ate had a right to be, and that she had a habit when she was thinking hard of pressing the tips of her lower canines against her lower lip that he found completely devastating. She learned that he kept his tools in a specific order and became genuinely unsettled if they were disturbed, that he had been self-taught from age 14, picking up shoeing techniques from every farrier he could find work near, that he had a habit of humming when he worked that he was entirely unaware of, that he was, under the professional competence and the deliberate quietness, very funny in a way that came out sideways when he was comfortable, and that she found this funnier than she had expected to find anything. "You made Asta laugh so hard she had to put her wine down," she said, the evening after the Center House gathering where the Merchant and Springworker Coalition had finally formalized its arrangement with a handshake and the destruction of a significant amount of hot-spiced wine. "I was not trying to be funny," he said. "That is what makes it funny," she said. On the 10th day after the market square, while Noah was trimming a cavalry gelding's overgrown frog and Yash was at his worktable doing something with survey coordinates, the quartermaster came in with a look on his face that Noah had learned to read as the precursor to news that was going to require something from him. "There is a situation," the quartermaster said. The situation was this. The garrison had received a request from the River Authority, in conjunction with the investigation into Keld's riders, for the garrison's farrier to provide a sworn account of the initial ransom delivery and subsequent events. The request was formal and required compliance. The garrison commander, Colonel Strand, had decided that this was, in fact, an excellent opportunity to establish an official record that reflected well on the garrison's response to the situation. "He wants to claim the rescue," Noah said. The quartermaster looked deeply uncomfortable. "He wants to ensure the record is complete and accurate," he said carefully. Yash set down her pen. She turned around on the stool and looked at the quartermaster with an expression of absolute stillness that was, Noah had learned, the sign of someone managing a large amount of controlled feeling. "The record," she said, "includes the fact that the garrison's official response was to file the situation as deeply unfortunate and take no further action." "The colonel is prepared to note that as well," the quartermaster said, which surprised Noah slightly. "He is covering himself," Yash said, not to the quartermaster but to Noah. "The River Authority investigation is going to establish the timeline regardless. If the garrison tries to obscure it, they look worse. He is getting ahead of it." "What do you want to do?" Noah said. She looked at him. The morning light from the forge window put copper and gold in her hair, and she was looking at him with the assessment that was never unkind and never careless, the look of someone who was always seeing more than she said. "I want to give the sworn account," she said. "My account. Completely and accurately, including the colonel's response." That will not make the garrison happy, the quartermaster said. The River Authority investigator is going to be here in 4 days, Yash said. I suggest the garrison spend those 4 days deciding whether its happiness or its credibility is more valuable. The quartermaster left, looking unhappy but not surprised. Noah went back to the gelding's hoof. After a moment, Yash said, "Thank you." He looked up. "For what?" "For not telling me to make it easier for the garrison," she said. "Why would I do that?" he said. "Because you have a contract with them," she said. "Because it is the sensible position. Because most people, when faced with a choice between easy and right, choose easy." "I do not have a strong attachment to easy," he said. "Easy has never particularly sought me out." She made the low sound again, the warm one. The River Authority investigator arrived in 3 days rather than 4, a woman named Jeva Kors who was thin and precise, and had the energy of someone who had been on a fast horse for a long time and was not interested in wasting any more time. She interviewed Noah, Yash, Marta, Asta, 2 of the garrison officers, and the man from Tent 1 who had been tied with his own belt. She took testimony for 2 days, filed her initial findings with the River Authority by messenger, and told Yash on her way out of town that the preliminary finding was that Keld's riders had engaged in unlawful coercion and armed intimidation of a civilian contractor, and that the garrison's official response would be noted as inadequate. "That does not make me whole," Yash said. "No," Jeva Kors agreed. "But it makes Keld substantially less whole, and I think that is what you are actually after." It was, Yash said later, which was more than she had expected from an official process. Colonel Strand quietly renewed Yash's survey contract without the usual renegotiation. He also, without making any particular mention of it, increased Noah's per-horse rate and extended his garrison contract from 1 year to 3. "He is trying to buy your silence," Yash said. "He is trying to keep me from taking my skills to a more grateful employer," Noah said, "which is not the same thing. I would have said what I said to the investigator regardless of the rate." "I know," she said. "I took the rate anyway." "Good," she said. "You were underpaid." The weeks settled into something that felt, to Noah, like the architecture of a life he had not believed he was going to get to have. He worked his horses and she worked her surveys, and they spent their evenings together and their nights more often than not. And Asheville, which was the kind of small town that noticed everything, noticed and adjusted to this new fact with the efficiency of a place that had seen stranger things. There was some of the predictable tension. A merchant near the upper terraces made a comment, early on, that was not quite quiet enough to be merely thought, and Yash had turned and looked at him with approximately 12 seconds of sustained eye contact and nothing more, and the merchant had found somewhere else to be, and had subsequently been exceptionally polite whenever their paths crossed. There was a new cavalry officer who arrived in the garrison's second-month rotation, and who expressed, to a junior officer and within Noah's hearing, some uncertainty about the appropriateness of the garrison's farrier having an arrangement with one of its contractors. Noah had set down the shoe he was fitting, looked at the officer, and said that the appropriateness of it was none of the garrison's business, that his work was contracted and complete, and that if the officer wanted to have a professional concern, he should direct it to the quartermaster. The officer had directed it to the quartermaster, who had told him, with what sounded like some personal satisfaction, that the arrangement was a private matter and not germane to either contract. The officer did not raise it again. Yash heard about both incidents from Marta, who heard about everything from everyone. "You handled the merchant well," she told Noah the evening after. "The officer also." "I did not do anything impressive," he said. "You stood there," she said. "That is what I mean. You stood there without apologizing and without qualifying and without trying to smooth it over. That is not nothing." She set her cup down. "In my experience, men who choose to be with an orc woman in a human town tend to eventually feel the weight of the disapproval more than they expected to. They start to qualify. They start to apologize not for me but for themselves, for the discomfort of the choice." He looked at her steadily. "Does it look like I am apologizing for the discomfort of the choice?" "No," she said, "it does not. I am not going to start." "I know," she said, and the way she said it was different from the way she usually confirmed things. It had the quality of something that had been decided finally and completely. It was on a Sunday morning, 2 months after the market square, that she asked him to come with her to the upper terrace. The upper terrace of the Veldra Hot Springs was closed to the public on Sundays for maintenance, which meant that at dawn on a Sunday morning it was empty except for the spring workers who came in before the crowds. And by the time the morning work was done and the workers had gone to breakfast, there was a window of perhaps an hour when the upper terrace was entirely alone. She had a key because of her survey contracts. She led him up through the terraces as the sun came over the volcanic ridge to the east and hit the pools in a way that turned the water from steaming gray to luminous blue-green, color so deep and clear that it looked like something that belonged in a story rather than a valley in the world. She sat at the edge of the uppermost pool, where the water came straight out of the volcanic rock at its source, and took off her boots and put her feet in, and after a moment's hesitation, he did the same. The water was warm but not scalding, and the mineral smell of it was sharp and clean, and the whole valley was spread below them. Asheville's white walls and red rooftops, the lower terraces, the market road, the garrison walls, and beyond it all the valley rim with its dark volcanic ridgeline against the morning sky. "My mother used to say," Yash said, "that orc women mark the things that matter. It is not always formal. Sometimes it is just an act, a place, a thing you do that means you have decided." He looked at her. "I wanted to bring you here," she said. "I have surveyed this terrace 37 times. I have never brought anyone here on a Sunday morning." "Is that the marking?" he said. "It is the beginning of it," she said. She reached into her jacket and took out a cord of red-dyed leather, the same color as the strips in her hair, and a small clasp of dark iron. She held them out to him. "In my clan's tradition," she said, "when a woman chooses a man, she gives him something that tells the world he is hers. It is not binding if he does not take it. You can say no. It will not change what is between us." She looked at his face. "But I want you to have it." He took the cord and the clasp from her hand. "How does it go on?" he said. She took them back and tied the cord around his wrist, the right one, where her own cord from the border war campaigns was tied, and fastened the iron clasp and put both hands around his wrist for a moment, her thumbs over the cord, and looked at it. Then she looked up at him. "You are mine," she said. "Noah Fletcher, I am telling the world." He turned his wrist over and looked at the cord, red against his sun-browned skin, and then he looked at her, at the warm amber of her eyes in the morning light and the gravity and the openness of her face, and the thing he had been carrying for months, the awareness of being seen and wanted by this particular person, settled into his bones and became something he did not have a word for but that felt permanent. "And you are mine," he said. "Yash Fireblood, I am telling the world." She kissed him in the morning sun at the top of the world's most beautiful pool, with her feet in the warm volcanic water and the valley spread below them, and he kissed her back with everything he had, all the months of it, and it was exactly as warm and sure and real as everything else about her. They sat at the edge of the pool for the better part of that Sunday morning, talking about small things and large ones, about her Eastern Range clan and his valley town, about the horses he wanted to acquire, and the route surveys she wanted to do in the northern passes before winter came, about Marta and Asta and the Springworkers Coalition, and whether the garrison's new cavalry officer was going to be less difficult than his opening position suggested. "He saw you handle the horseshoe gauge problem with the roan last week," she said, "and he was watching the trim on the gray that had the cracked wall. He will come around." "People usually do, once the horses are right," Noah said. "Is that your philosophy?" "Horses and people are not that different," he said. "They need to know you are steady and you know what you are doing, and they need enough time to figure that out." She looked at him sideways. "Is that how you approached me?" "You were never a project," he said. "You were the person I wanted, and I did not know how to say it, and then the world gave me a reason to act." He thought about it. "The rope and the hoof knife were not a strategy." "No," she said. "That is why they worked." He laughed. She leaned against him, her shoulder to his, which was comfortable and slightly impractical given the difference in their sizes, and entirely perfect. And they stayed like that until the spring workers started coming back up for the afternoon shift, and they collected their boots and went back down to the town. The first frost warning came 3 weeks later, which in a volcanic valley was more of a suggestion than an actual danger, but which meant the northern passes would be closing within a month, and any survey work that needed to happen in the highlands would need to happen now. Yash came to the forge the morning after the frost warning with a map rolled under her arm and the expression of someone who had been thinking hard and had made a decision. "I have a problem," she said. He set down his rasp. "Tell me." The northern pass route she needed to survey ran through territory that was technically outside the river authority's jurisdiction, and inside what the border treaty designated as the clan transition corridor, which meant that an orc woman traveling it alone was in a gray area that depended on which clan's runners you encountered, and how up-to-date their information about the border treaty situation was. Not dangerous in a predictable way, but uncertain in a way that compounded in the highlands, far from any garrison or town. "I can take a garrison escort," she said. "It is slower and louder, and I get less good survey data because I have to work around their pace, and I also have to submit the escort request 3 weeks in advance, and the window is in 5 days. "Or," he said. She looked at him. "Or you take a farrier," he said. "Someone who has his own horse and gear and can travel at your pace, and who has no official status that would complicate the clan corridor question, and who has good reason to look at highland terrain, because the pass horses need reshoeing in the cold months." She was quiet for a moment. "You want to come," she said. "I have been wanting to come since the first time you walked into this forge," he said, which was true in multiple senses, and she knew it. "The survey is the reason, but yes, I want to come." She studied him. "It is not a safe ride," she said. "The highland routes are technical and the weather in the passes can turn in an hour." "I know. We may encounter clan runners who are not familiar with the treaty provisions and who will see a human man with an orc woman and draw their own conclusions. I know that too. You are not concerned." "Yash," he said, and she looked at him with the same attention she always gave him when he used her name instead of her title. "I climbed a volcanic service trail in the dark with a rope and a hoof knife. I think I can manage a survey route." She looked at him for a long moment. "We leave in 3 days," she said. "Pack for cold nights and uncertain footing, and bring the good rope, not the horse rope." "I only have 1 rope," he said. "Then bring it," she said. They left on a gray morning with 2 horses and 3 days of provisions and Yash's survey equipment in a long leather case, strapped to her horse's flank. Brick carried Noah and the tool roll and the rope, and a pack that was heavier than Brick usually appreciated, but which she bore with the steadiness of a mare who had been through everything, and had no opinion left about additional inconvenience. Asheville fell away below them as the road climbed, and the volcanic valley with its hot springs and white buildings and Market Road became a view, and then a memory of a view, and then just the smoke of the springs visible between the ridge peaks, and then nothing. The highland route was everything Yash had said. The terrain was technical and cold and beautiful in the specific way of high volcanic country in late season, black rock and frost-gray scrub, and the occasional thermal vent laying a line of steam across the ridgeline like a lazy signature. They traveled in companionable near silence for the most part, because the terrain required attention, and because they had the kind of ease with each other now that did not require noise to fill it. On the second afternoon, they met a pair of clan runners at a highland crossroads, young and wary, wearing the black endoker of a clan Noah did not recognize. They stopped at the crossroads and looked at Yash and Noah, and the horses with the particular wariness of people who were trying to determine how much of a problem they had. Yash spoke to them in what Noah realized was an orc dialect, different from the trade tongue she usually used, older sounding, more rounded in the vowels. She was calm and specific and patient, and after a few minutes of back and forth, the runner's posture changed from wary to neutral, and then, as the conversation continued, to something that was almost relieved. The way people relaxed when they found out the territory they were in was not as complicated as they had feared. One of the runners looked at Noah during this conversation, a direct and uncomplicated assessing look, and Noah met it and held it and kept his face open, which was the only thing he had to offer that might be useful. The runner said something to Yash. Yash said something back. The runner nodded once, the kind of nod that was acknowledgement and respect both, and they moved on. "What was that?" Noah asked, when the runners were out of earshot. "He asked who you were," Yash said. "I told him you were the man I had marked." She looked forward down the trail. "He said that a man an orc woman marked in the old way was a man worth knowing." "Is that good?" "In the clan corridor," she said. "It is the best possible thing to be." He looked at the cord on his wrist, the red leather and the dark iron clasp, and something in his chest was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the thermal vents. They camped on the second night in the shelter of a volcanic overhang that Yash had marked on her map as a previous survey camp, with a fire pit already dug and a stack of dry wood left by whoever had used it last. The fire was small, but the overhang held the heat, and they sat close together against the cold that came down off the ridge after dark. And Yash did her survey notes by firelight with the precise, rapid handwriting that Noah had watched her use at his work table. And he checked Brick's feet and the pack horse's feet by the same light, and then sat beside her and read nothing because he did not have a book and was entirely content with this. "When we get back," she said, without looking up from her notes. "When we get back," he said. "I want to stop keeping two sets of quarters," she said. "I want to stop pretending the arrangement is a question. It is not a question anymore, and keeping the separate rooms is becoming inconvenient and expensive, and also I am tired of walking to the east wing in the morning." He looked at her. "I have more space in the forge loft," he said, "but it smells like horses." "I like horses more than I like them to know," she said. "Do not tell them," he laughed. "Your secret is safe." She looked up from her notes then, turned to look at him, and the firelight was in her eyes and on her face, and she looked at him with the full warmth of someone who had stopped calculating risk and was just looking at the person she had chosen and was glad of it. "You have made me glad," she said simply. He put his arm around her, which required more than usually creative geometry given their heights, but was entirely achievable, and she leaned into him with the ease of a woman who had decided where she belonged and was not second-guessing it. "Back at you," he said quietly. The survey was completed on the third day, the last pass measured and charted before noon, and they turned south for home under a clear, cold sky with the volcanic ridgeline sharp against it, and the whole highland world very still and clean. They came back down into the valley in the late afternoon, and Asheville was warm and steaming below them, and the market road was bright with the late vendors, and the hot spring pools on the terraces caught the last of the sun and sent it back in shifting green-blue light that was, Noah had decided months ago, the most beautiful light he had ever seen. He looked at it now with Yash riding beside him and the cord on his wrist and the full knowledge of where he was in his own life, which was somewhere he had not expected to be and which felt entirely, exactly right. "The garrison will want the survey filed before Friday," Yash said. "The garrison will have it before Friday. The colonel is likely to want a written account of the Highland crossing for the treaty records. He can have that too. And the Springworkers Coalition meeting is Wednesday evening." "I know, Marta already told me." She glanced at him. "What did Marta say?" "She said the coalition was thinking of formally nominating you as survey director for the Valley mineral rights with independent authority, no garrison oversight required." Yash was quiet for a moment. "She told me that as well," she said. "I was going to ask you what you thought about it." "I think it is exactly what should have happened 3 years ago," he said, "and I think you should take it. It means more time at Veldra. More nights away from the town. You have a good horse and good rope," he said, and a stubborn farrier who has expressed an interest in Highland roots. She looked at him with a smile that was the real one, the rare one, the one that was entirely unguarded and warm and entirely, specifically hers. "We will need a bigger loft," she said. "I will build one," he said. "I have good hands." "You have extraordinary hands," she said, with a warmth in it that made him look at his hands and then at her, and then at the road ahead to avoid running brick into a stone wall. They rode into Asheville through the lower gate as the evening lamps were being lit along the market road, the warm volcanic air rising to meet them as they descended, and the people on the road stepped aside and looked up, and several of them raised a hand in greeting to Yash, because she had stood in their square and put their problem face down in the stone, and they had not forgotten it, and she inclined her head to them with a gravity that was not coldness but acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of someone who was exactly who she was and knew it. Noah rode beside her and the cord was on his wrist, and the valley was warm and it was home. They gave the horses to the public stable and went up through the market road to Marta's guest house, because Marta had said there would be food on the table when they returned, and Marta's promises in that regard were ones you could build plans around. Marta looked at them when they walked through the door. She looked at Noah's wrist. She looked at Yash's face. She said, "Sit down," and went to the kitchen and came back with enough food for 4 people, which was the appropriate amount for 2 people who had been riding for 3 days in cold Highland air. They ate and they talked, and Marta told them about the 3 days they had missed, which included the coalition vote on Yash's proposed directorship, which had passed with one abstention, that being a merchant on the far end of the lower terrace who had his own ambitions about the survey contracts and who had been overruled by everyone who knew anything about surveying. "It is official," Marta said. "If you want it." Yash set down her spoon. She looked at Noah. He nodded once. She looked at Marta. "I want it," she said. Marta nodded with satisfaction. "There is a ceremony," she said. "Signing of the charter, public in the square." "Of course in the square," Yash said, with something in her voice that was wry and fond. "Tuesday morning," Marta said. "The whole town will be there." "The whole town can be there," Yash said. "I have nothing to hide from this town." She looked at Noah again when she said it, with the particular look that was just for him, the warm and certain one. And he looked back at her and thought that this was the shape of the life he was living now, right here, in Marta's kitchen in this volcanic valley, with this woman who had outlived 3 men who loved her and had decided, stubbornly, that he was going to be the one who stayed. He was going to be that. He had decided, with the kind of certainty that did not argue with itself. Tuesday morning came clear and warm, and the square was full. Not just with the usual market crowd, but with the spring workers and the terrace lease families and Asta, and the retired soldiers, and the various people who had attended the guest house meeting, and who had stood in the square 2 months ago, and watched an orc woman put a problem on the ground, and with others besides. People who simply lived in this valley, and understood that what was being signed this morning was a document that said who the valley belonged to, which was the people who worked it. The coalition's charter was written on good vellum and laid on a table in the center of the square, and the coalition members signed it one by one, and then the president of the coalition, who was Asta, invited the newly elected survey director to sign. Yash walked to the table with the stride of someone who did not require anyone's approval but was genuinely glad to have it. She took the pen. She signed her name, Yash Fireblood, in the quick, decisive hand that Noah had watched at his work table and at Marta's kitchen and by firelight in the Highland overhang, and the square applauded, and someone in the back corner cheered with the specific enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting to cheer. She turned from the table and found Noah at the edge of the crowd and walked to him through the people who made way, and she stopped in front of him and looked at him with the full warmth of the real smile, and he looked back at her and thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that he was the most fortunate man in this valley. She put her hand on his jaw the same way she had the first night, and she kissed him in the square in front of the entire town without any qualification or performance. Just a woman kissing the man she had chosen in the place where they both belonged, and the square made the sound of a place that was glad about something. He kissed her back. The cord was on his wrist. The valley was warm. The springs were rising. Later, when the ceremony had moved to Marta's for the inevitable food and loud conversation that followed any public occasion in a small town, and the room was full and warm, and Noah was standing near the window with a cup of hot wine, and Yash was across the room accepting congratulations from Asta with that measured gravity that was her version of pleasure, Marta came to stand beside him. She looked out the window with him for a moment, at the steaming pools below the town and the volcanic ridge above. "3 men before you," she said. "I know," he said. "She told you about all of them." "She did." Marta was quiet for a moment. "Seville was a good man," she said. "He was a friend of mine from the border campaigns. He would have been glad of this for her." Noah looked at her. "He would have liked you," Marta said. "He would have found the rope and hoof knife story very funny." "Everyone finds it funny," Noah said, "because it is funny and also completely characteristic of the kind of person who would actually do it." She sipped her wine. She did not think anyone would come for her. She was already working out how to escape on her own when you cut the steak. "She told me." He looked across the room at Yash, who had finished with Asta, and was now listening to one of the retired soldiers with the patient attention she gave to everyone who deserved it. "She would have gotten out," he said. "Probably," Marta agreed. "But there is a difference between getting out alone and being come for." He thought about that. "Yes," he said, "there is." Yash looked up from across the room and found him the way she had started doing, the automatic locating that was not possessiveness so much as easy knowing. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked back at the retired soldier, but the corner of her mouth had moved. He turned the cord on his wrist. Outside, the springs rose. The valley breathed. He was exactly where he was going to be. She had said she had outlived every man who loved her, and he had said he planned to be stubborn. And that was exactly what he intended to keep being. Every morning of every year, this warm volcanic valley and this extraordinary woman and this one improbable, entirely correct life would give him. The hot wine was good. The room was full of people. Yash Fireblood was across the room, and she was his, and he was hers, and the cord on his wrist was red as the fire and steady as stone, and it was going nowhere. Neither was he.